Hey everyone, Mike Frisch here, Fishing Midwest TV. Today I'm at Hannay's Marine in the Twin Cities, and today we're talking walleye fishing, we're talking spring walleye fishing, and in particular, we're talking about fishing a jig, all right? A jig is probably the leading producer of walleyes in the spring. It really doesn't matter where you fish in the Midwest. If you're a river fisherman, you're a lake fisherman, you like to pitch a jig with live bait, meat as we call it, like a minnow, or you're a plastics fisherman, a jig has a place in the spring. Now there's a couple of key components that I want to talk about when it comes to fishing a jig in the spring. The first one is this. It's this whole thing about feel, all right? In addition to hosting Fishing Midwest TV, I'm also an open water fishing guide. Most of my time is spent guiding clients for walleyes, and one of the things that people always ask me is, hey Mike, what does a walleye feel like? It's a really hard question to answer because I always say no two bites are ever the same, all right? So let's talk a little bit about how I fish a jig. So what I like to do is I'll spend a lot of time in the spring pitching, particularly as zebra mussels have kind of invaded the Midwest and our waters are clearing. The old fishing close to the boat, that still works in some waters, but a lot of places you're better off pitching your jig, getting it out away from the boat to avoid spooking the walleyes. Now, first thing is this, using the right jig. This is the new for 2020 Crater jig from Strike King. This jig will actually be introduced later on this year, but it's got a little crater concave bottom, so it's got a bit of a wobble on the fall, and it stands up on the bottom as well. Two features that are really important in a jig, plus it's got a great hook, and it comes in a wide variety of walleye colors. It's the Crater jig from Strike King. It'll be available later in 2020. Now, when I pitch a jig, a couple things are important. When I pitch my jig out, the first thing that I always do, and I'm just going to pitch it a little way here, the first thing that I always do is I tell folks, if you watch, you can see a lot of the bites. Yeah, you can feel them, but a lot of times you can see them. And what I advise people to do is watch your line where it actually enters the water. Because a lot of times what will happen is that line will tick, it'll move, or if it's a big fish, sometimes you'll actually see the line start to swim off to the side. So lots of times you can catch more fish by watching your line and telling when they bite. So that's the first point. So what I do is I pitch my jig out, let it settle into the bottom, and let's say I'm fishing a jig in a minnow. Once it's down to the bottom, I reel, and what I like to do is, again, watch the line and just kind of feel for any pressure or any resistance. That pressure or resistance might be a bite. And here's what I tell folks. If it feels unnatural, okay, it feels heavy, it feels too light, fish is swimming up with it, it feels anything but the way you think it should feel, I tell folks, get tight to the fish and set the hook. Because here's why. You can't get in a feeling contest with a walleye and win very often. Because what happens is, people pitch the jig out, all right? It settles to the bottom. Let's say a walleye sucks it in and starts to swim off with it. They feel something a little different, but they're trying to feel, hey, is that a fish? By the time they determine it, the fish has already dropped the jig. So if it feels different, I always tell people, set the hook. That's really important. So what I like to do is I'll lift the bait, kind of hold my rod in place, let it kind of glide towards me, and then it'll settle back down. All right, then I'll reel to get tight to it again, and I'll try to feel for anything different, and then I'll lift it and let it come towards me, okay? That's my basic retrieve. Some days, however, I will pitch that jig out, and with that Crater jig, I'll just let that minnow kind of swim and undulate right on bottom, all right? And they want it really slow on those days. So sometimes I pitch it out, I just let it settle in the bottom and let the minnow work its magic, and after maybe 10 seconds or so, then maybe I'll bring it towards me. Sometimes it's a pitch and a steady retrieve, all right? So what you need to do is you need to experiment, but here's the key. Feels different, set the hook. One of the best jig fishermen I know is Artie Arndt. Artie owns Artie's Bait and Tackle in Big Stone, in Ortonville, Minnesota on Big Stone Lake. Artie's won a bunch of money in MWC tournaments, winning MWC tournaments, and other tournaments on Big Stone pitching jigs. And Artie always tells me, if it feels different, set the hook. If you set on a rock, a weed, whatever, jigs are cheap, all right? And that's really good advice because Artie doesn't miss very many fish because he doesn't try to feel for them. If he thinks it could be a fish, he gets tight and he sets the hook. So that's really good advice. Last thing I want to share for you is the importance of the right rod and reel. When I pitch jigs, I use rods from about 6.5 feet out to about 7 feet. This is a new model from Lew's. This is the Lew's Speed Stick. And in the new Lew's Speed Sticks, they've got 4 different jigging rods, all right, in various lengths. So they've got a rod that'll do anything you want for jigging. This is the 6.7 model. This is my favorite. These rods are IM8 graphite. They've got cork grips, high quality reel seats, and check out this action. It's got very fast action so that you can actually feel that fish before he feels you, but when you go to set the hook, you get good backbone and a solid hook set. So this is a lightweight, very sensitive, great jigging rod. Want to know the best part? $79 is the retail, all right? $79. That's a super, super value for a good jigging rod, okay? So that's important. A reel is important as well. This is the Team Lew's Custom Pro. It's got a great drag, it's super lightweight, and it's smooth. So the right reel, the right rod, I pair with fluorocarbon line, 6 pound in the spring, and pitch your jig, and you're gonna catch more fish. Now, a couple other things are really important. Again, make sure that you're watching the line, all right, so that you know. Again, set the hook when you think there's a fish, but here's the other part. When you do get a fish, don't be in a hurry, because a big fish, particularly in shallow water in the spring, doesn't have a lot of place to go. One of the things people do is they put too much pressure on that fish and pull that hook out. So again, use a reel with a good sensitive or a good smooth drag so that that fish can kind of wear itself out. And then when it gets close, have your partner be ready to go for it with the net, all right? A jig in a minnow, a jig in plastic, doesn't matter. This is a staple amongst anglers in the spring. But again, if it feels different, set the hook. You do that, all right? You pitch that jig out in the shallows, you get bit, feels different, you set the hook. You're gonna catch more walleyes, you're gonna have more fun this spring and into summer. And as always, I encourage you to always include a youngster in your next outdoor adventure. Mike Frisch, Fishing the Midwest TV. Hope you enjoyed this and you learned some things today.